Well, like every young kid, I always had an interest in aviation. We lived up in Ohio, and our home was located right on an airway to Toledo Airport, so we always had airliners flying overhead, and I just always marveled at flight, watching them fly over. And as a kid, of course, I built model airplanes and still do. I was always fascinated with flight, and just started at I'd say probably when I was 8, 10 years old. I really got interested in aviation.
What was your check ride like?
Back then at FAA was a little bit easier. It took about 15 minutes from the time I got in the airplane till I got back. It just took off, did a left turn. He said, engine failure, shot an emergency lantern. He said, let's go into traffic pattern, went and landed. He said, that's it. It's not like it is today, I'm sure. Of course, we had a little oral examination, but that was, I learned to fly up in Ohio out of a alfalfa field, and then had a little Luska Mayday and learned to fly in it. Flew it for several years.
Tell me about your flying career.
Say again?
Your flying career. Tell me about your flying career.
Well, of course, I started in high school flying, and then when I got into college, you had to have 2 years of college to get in the Air Force cadets. Well, I went to school at Bowling Green because my grandma lived there, and she gave me free room and board, and so all I had back then was tuition, and I always worked in summers, and I was going to quit at the end of 2 years, but I got to know one of the Air Force ROTC instructors, and he encouraged me to finish up college. He says, you have the worst part over now, the first 2 years. The last 2 years, you get a little pay for them. That was the magic formula, a little pay. So I finished up college and went through pilot training in grade. And like he said the difference in pay, I went through basic pilot training, the difference in pay more than paid for my college education. And it was a lot easier too. And I was the last class to go through B-25s in the Air Force. They had multi-engine and twin-engine training back then, and I was the last class to go through the B-25s at Lubbock, Texas.
Can you tell me about your service to the country?
Well, after I got on, when I finished flight training, I was sent to Dover Air Force Base, Delaware, and flew 124s for MATS in the Atlantic Division. And stayed in the Air Force about 3 years after that, after I finished pilot training. Then I went home and went to work in a family business, and I joined the Air National Guard up in Toledo, Ohio. And I flew the support airplane, which is a Twin Beach C-45, and then one night at a party, I asked what I'd have to do to get checked out in jets, and he said, drink 3 martinis and still stand. The next day I was in the back end of a T-33. So I got checked out in the T-33 and then got checked out in an F-84F and flew it. The rest of the time I was in the Guard, which is I spent about 5 years in the Air National Guard flying F-84s out of Toledo. And then, of course, I always had dreamed about being an airline pilot, but it just never happened because I got recalled back to active duty, and while I was there, I applied for C-130 school, and I got accepted to that, so I stayed in the Air Force a little longer, flying C-130s all over the world, actually. I went just about just about all over the world in C-130s. A wonderful airplane, wonderful airplane.
What was your role in flying that plane?
I was a troop carrier. I was, of course, the aircraft commander, and I flew. I spent about 6 months flying in Vietnam, just personnel and cargo and anything that needed done, you know. And I came back because my wife got real sick, and I came to Florida and ended up living here in Winter Haven. Enjoyed it, and always pretty much had an airplane all the time I was here of some sorts, you know.
What would you like me to ask about?
Just kind of, you know, you were involved in models and you built several airplanes.
Right.
Yeah. Let's talk about which airplane. What have you built?
In experimental airplanes, Bill Borey and I built a Emerald and a Glass Star. When I first moved back to Florida, my wife says there's a guy living down the street that's about as nuts about airplanes as you are, and it happened to be Bill Borey, and he lived 2 doors down from my mother-in-law. And we became friends then, and we're still friends, and that's been about 45 years ago, I believe. And Bill and I got together and are interested in models and real airplanes. And at the time, Bill was building a Pete and Paul, and I said, you know, it'd be kind of fun to build an airplane. So that ended up in the project of the Glass Star, and we built that first. Then we decided, boy, that was so much fun, we want to do another one. Well, I heard of this Emerald project that had been started, and we bought that and finished that up. It was both a nice experience and a lot of fun.
Now, you're a member of the EAA?
At the present time, no, but at that time I was.
Okay. Tell me about the importance of the EAA with building your own plane, the role they might play.
Well, you got such a vast knowledge of people that, you know, if you've got any questions about anything, you'll find someone there that's an expert in it. If you just ask, don't be afraid to ask. When you got something you can't figure out, you know, they're always more than willing to help and give advice, which is worthy advice. And I think that's one of the biggest things that they do. And of course, they also encourage you, you know, because sometimes you think, you know, when you look at that big book when you start out building one, think, what did I get myself into this time, you know? But you just got to take it one step at a time and don't get in a hurry. It's just going to take time. But they are very, very helpful, very helpful. I had a lot of guys, you know, they encourage you, and like I said, their knowledge that they have, and some in their special areas is invaluable, you know, just great help, great help.
I'm sitting here thinking, as you're talking about this, that you have a friendship that goes 45 years.
Uh-huh.
I'm 47
Uh-huh.
right now. Do you have a friendship that outlasts my lifespan with one person based on aviation?
Right, that was my friend Bill.
Because of aviation?
Yeah, because of aviation. Yeah, he's just a, well, Walton, just a great guy and exceptionally talented. Right, Walt? Very, very talented. I mean, he's in both big airplanes and models. He just has got the touch. Of course, he started aviation way back when. I think when he was 12 years old, he was. Right, isn't that right, Walt? I believe it was about 12. I think he said he started.
I think younger than that.
Yeah.
His dad was an Army Air Corps instructor, and his brother was too.
Yeah.
And they owned airplanes since he was a little kid.
Yeah.
But, I guess, you know, Bill said you've owned a whole lot of airplanes.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was. Well, when I sold my business, I was like a kid and stuck his hand in a candy jar, you know. Of course, back then, airplanes were reasonable. Today, they're very expensive. But back then, you know, you could still get good buys at them. You know, I didn't buy them to resell them. I just bought them to enjoy them.
Yep. Somebody, your son, I think, was
Yeah.
had full of fuel and cost just pennies or something?
Yeah, well, I bought a Luscombe at a sheriff's sale for $200. That's how I got started. And I knew a guy that was an A&E, and he didn't live too far, and he came over and helped me. And then I knew an instructor, and I did his yard work, and he taught me to fly it. That, of course, that was way back when, it was cheap, and I lived out in the country when we had an alfalfa field out back, and we just kept the airplane behind the barn there and flew it out of there, and it lasted a long time. I was really, really surprised.
How old were you when you bought that airplane, Gene?
I was about 15, 16 years old, something like that. But see, I'd been working in a Kroger store for about a year and saved up some money, and didn't. I just knew I wanted to learn to fly. Of course, my dad was a pilot, and he really encouraged me to keep it up. He didn't say, no, you're not going to do that crazy thing. He encouraged me to keep flying, which is fortunate for me. Now, none of my brothers, I had two brothers, and neither one of them had any interest in aviation. They liked it, but they didn't have any interest in it, So there was Big Gene in his airplanes,
I think I got a good footage here.
Did you have any experiences when you were flying the F-84s? Any kind of things happen to the airplane or?
Well, my first solo flight, of course, you didn't go up by yourself, you had an IP on your wing, And this guy that was flying on my wing, I no sooner got in the air and got the airplane cleaned up when we were climbing up to, I forget, 25,000 feet, something like that. And I said, hey, Jim, I got a red light in the cockpit. And it was a moment of silence, And he says, oh. It turned out all we had was just the fuel that was in the fuselage, which, of course, on your solo flight, they didn't load you down with fuel. They kept the airplane weight pretty well down for about an hour flight. And so it really meant that we had to get it on the ground in about 15 minutes or I'd have been a glider. And that was probably about the only really harrowing thing I had. I was in a flight of 4 one time, flying on a practice bombing range, and the guy in front of me got target fascination, which people have always heard of, but I had one happen right in front of me, and he went splat right in, just flew right straight in the ground. So I pulled away from that. This guy that ended up being the chase on my initial flight of F-84, he ended up staying in the Air Force, and when he retired, he was the highest time single-engine jet pilot in the Air Force, which was quite a privilege, because he'd been flying all the time. I didn't have any really harrowing experience flying the C-130, it's just a good airplane, reliable.
Somebody shooting at you over there.
Yeah. Well, I never gave him much of a chance. we weren't allowed to use the pressurization over Vietnam because it was too much maintenance, So we had to fly at 10,000 feet, something like that. But we get over where we're going to land, and the navigator, he says, we're here now, Captain. I said, okay, hold on to your socks because we're going down the hill. And I dumped full flaps, gear, and put the props in flight idle. And that would give you a descent of about 6,000 foot a minute, right down the pike. And go in there and land short, And you can land that thing land it real short because you had fully reversible props, big paddles out there, slam.